Okay, well, hello, Rachel. It's great to be with you.
Hi, Dr. Morscheck. Thank you so much for volunteering to share your knowledge with us. I'm really excited.
Pleasure. It's a pleasure. And I look forward to telling you a few things that I've learned through the years. And I'm going to endeavor to answer these questions that you gave to me beforehand. But if there's something that is unclear or that you think comes to your mind that maybe I could expound upon a little bit further, don't hesitate to let me know.
Awesome. Thanks.
And if we have some time at the end, maybe there's more questions that you have.
Absolutely.
So what I've laid out here is, you sent me a large group of questions and I put them maybe 2 or 3 per slide,
Okay.
and I'll endeavor to answer those. So the question, how did I begin teaching? The first teaching job that I had was as a TF when I was a grad student at the University of Michigan. I was working on my doctoral degree there. And the people that I taught were mostly people from out in the community who weren't even music majors, or if they were students, they still weren't music majors. So there wasn't a lot of oversight placed upon my teaching. And consequently, I was left to my own devices, basically to teach what I had learned by that point in my training and so forth. But while I was still a doctoral student, I got my first teaching job as an instructor at Appalachian State University in Boone, North Carolina. A beautiful, beautiful place. And I was there for about 2 years. And the chair of the voice division had been a classmate, a colleague at the University of Michigan. They had an opening, so she gave me a call and they hired me. So that's how the first job came about. That was all the way back in 1989, if I haven't mentioned that already. The next question, have I ever taught young children? In terms of voice lessons, no. But when I was a grad student, I did direct the choirs, the youth choir and the children's choir at a large church. And I remember feeling very nervous when I had to take the children's choir that I directed. They were called the Cherub Choir. They were 4 and 5 years old. And I had to take them sometimes, and they had to sing on the Sunday morning service. And I was a nervous wreck when they had to do that. But I've never actually taught voice lessons to children. I'm not sure that I think it's a good idea, actually, as opposed to just training them perhaps to sing as a group, or training them in another instrument so they begin developing musical skills. Yeah.
It's cool that you have some choral experience, though, for the upfront members. That's what we do.
Yes. Yeah. I actually wanted to be, when I was an undergrad, I wanted to be a conductor.
Oh.
I had a fantastic conducting teacher, and he inspired me very much. I loved conducting. It helped me in terms of my own musicality in being able to learn music.
Right.
Because I knew where the beats were.
Right.
And so forth.
It's a different perspective.
Yeah. And I think oftentimes, because of that love for conducting and knowing a little bit about it, conductors that I work with, they enjoy having me sing for them because I know where the beat is, I know where I need to be, I understand rhythm and that sort of thing. What do you do in the first lesson with a new student? I generally have 3 objectives in the first lesson with a new student. And I'm not thinking of an introductory lesson where someone is looking at UNT. I'm thinking about a student who's decided to come to UNT. We know that they're going to work with me and I with them, and so they're coming in for their first lesson. So I'm going to answer this question as if it's a freshman.
Perfect.
So I have 3 objectives. The first one is to engage with them as a human being. I remember what I felt like my freshman year, the first day of classes, or even before then during orientation, and how overwhelmed I was. So I want to make sure that person, that student, is in a relatively good place, emotionally speaking, as we have our lesson. Okay, perhaps they've had a rough day, or they've just everything is piling up and so forth. So I want to ask a few questions to just see how they're doing. And oftentimes I don't know much about these students, so I'll ask a few questions about what town they come from and what high school they went to. Does anybody else in their family sing? These sorts of things. And I try to find a balance of how far I'm going to dig, okay, just to keep it comfortable. And I might say if they have any questions of me and so forth. But that's my first priority. The next thing is to make sure that that they do sing a little bit. And so what I want to find out, I have an idea already by this time, but I want to just vocalize them and see what the range of their voice is. And I asked them if they've had previous voice lessons, what might be an exercise they are used to using. They are used to singing. And I will take an exercise they are familiar with and use that to explore the upper and lower ranges so that they can feel some bit of comfort in front of this new teacher. I'm not necessarily interested in the extreme edges, the very, very highest note and the very, very lowest note, but just where is their voice comfortable for performance? And most freshman undergrads have about an octave and a third to an octave and a fifth of performable notes. Okay, and sometimes it's a little bit smaller for the men versus the women. Then the third objective is based upon what I find in those ranges, is to begin telling them about some repertoire that I think would be good for them to learn. I might actually recommend at least one specific resource to purchase. They may already have some of their own music, but of course the requirement for us is four songs for the semester. And so I like to stay with just 2 Italian and 2 English. And I want to find something that does 3 things. It fits within the range. It has a reasonable tessitura. And it's no slower than andante. What are 2 of the hardest things to do in any instrument? Play softly and slowly.
Right. That's interesting. I've never thought about tempo in choosing music.
Yes. There's a song by Schubert, Nacht und Träume. It's a beautiful, beautiful song. It's only 2 pages when you open up the score, and it looks pretty reasonable, but it is very slow. And we've seen it assigned to some undergrads, and it puts a lot of extra challenges in the way. So you want something that a young student, a beginning student, can sort of sink their teeth into it. Something with some vigor, something where they can. Giles Sole dal Gange is a great piece for a young low voice. Or Vittoria, Vittoria mio core.
Right.
Things like this. Rugiadose odorose for the ladies is very nice. these sorts of things. Do I have a step-by-step approach to technique? And how do you talk about pedagogy with young singers? So I like to think that I have a step-by-step approach. I haven't always had that approach. I've built it over time. So when I graduated from the university with my doctorate, I was teaching, all the things that I knew at that point were pretty much only what I had learned to finish my degree, to accomplish my degree. I had only studied with 2 teachers.
Mm-hmm.
I had had a pedagogy course. I had actually 2 pedagogy courses, which were pretty much worthless. All right, they were not here at UNT. They're not of the caliber of pedagogy course that I know you're getting from Dr. Austin, right? I would argue that I can't imagine that there's a better pedagogy course, whether undergrad or graduate level, around the country from what he teaches. So I've had to build this idea into my thinking that teaching voice has to be ordered. It has to be ordered. And I approach the teaching of voice with as comprehensive an understanding of how this instrument works, not how I want it to sound.
Mm.
Let me say that one more time. I teach and intend and endeavor to organize my teaching around the idea of getting this instrument to work properly, freely, but not trying to produce a certain sound. Okay? So it's not until the second lesson that I begin talking about pedagogy. And I always begin by first talking about the 3 components of all acoustical instruments. Every acoustical instrument has these 3 things. I get this from William Vennard. He was the big music pedagogue, voice pedagogy teacher when I was in undergrad. Singing, the Mechanism and the Technique by William Vennard. And he says that all instruments have at least these 3 things: an actuator, a vibrator, and a resonator. So I will ask the student if they've ever played any other instrument: piano, trumpet, clarinet. And then I'll ask them, okay, what is the actuator? What is it that begins? What has to engage first? And if we're taking the trumpet, for instance, it's the air. Okay, you have to have air flowing.
Right.
And then that connects with the vibrator of the trumpet, which is the lips.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that leaves the resonator, which is the brass tube. Well, we have those 3 things for the voice. You have the actuator or initiator, the breath. So you have to understand how this whole system works. You have to understand the muscles and what causes the air to come in and how the air wants to leave and how we endeavor to not allow the air to leave, right? We don't let it rush out. That's the actuator. Then this in here is the vibrator, the vocal folds. Every single tone or grunt or sound that we make, that we speak or sing, is going to be made by these 2 vocal folds vibrating together. Oh, wow, It's all vibration. And of course, that can work in a healthy way or not a healthy way, right? So this is an example of not a good closure of the vibrator, right? It's really breathy. Okay? Or this is too much closure of the vibrator. Really pressured. There's a balance there between those two things.
Or I can let my larynx go really high. That's not good either for the vibe.
The vibrator needs to be low for us to have, okay? And which leaves us with the third thing for the singer, the resonator. This is where most of the confusion is. A lot of people say, well, it's right here, right? The resonator for the singer is actually this tube. That tube. And we can take that tube and we can make it long, and we can round our lips or change our tongue, and that causes vowels. O, E, A, Ah. Okay? And all those things have to be figured out individually, and they all have to be coordinated. Well, that doesn't happen overnight. That takes a long time. Okay? If I only had to work, if everybody would come in for a lesson every day, and all they did was work on their voice, things would happen a lot faster. But you've got to go to choir, and you've got your music history and music theory and all these things, and not to mention your general ed requirements and so forth. So I've added here a link on this website, which takes you to a nifty little article from Temple University Health, I believe it is. Yeah, Temple Health, which is part of Temple University. And it talks about these three elements for the voice. The title of the article is what you have there. How does my voice work? And it talks about these three things.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that resource.
Sure. Now, somebody could say, well, you actually have more parts to your instrument than just those three. And you do. You have the brain. Every instrument is led by a brain, right? A human brain. Everybody's got ears. And then you've got your articulators, right? And what do we do with our articulators? We form words. So we have to train those too. Okay? Again, my purpose is to work on the mechanism, the mechanics of singing, not the sound. And usually what happens is the instrument begins to free up, it begins to show itself, and the sound itself, the natural beauty of the voice begins to show, begins to be exposed. And everybody's is different. It's a beautiful thing. So what I've listed here are essentially the main points that I endeavor to work for with each student. So the first thing that is really important, and I've just really learned this just in the last few months, it's very helpful to take a very, very slow, absolutely quiet breath. And the throat and the thorax will just open up. Okay? If you're taking a breath and there's any sound of like that, I'm exaggerating to make my point. That means the throat is closed. Yeah, it should be open.
Mm-hmm.
Then from that, I have them simply make a sound. Not sing, but just make a sound. Oh. 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 And for the ladies, chest voice or head voice. I like to start in chest voice. So there's very little stress on the voice. Okay? Just making noise. Then what I do is I'll give them a pitch. And I'll ask them, okay, make that sound, breathe that way, make that sound, but now start on this pitch. Oh. Oh. Can you hear how that matches the pitch?
Right, it does.
Right? So what I'm doing is I'm exercising the actuator. I'm starting to train the vibrator to think, to do something based upon what the mind thinks.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also beginning to change the idea of what it means to sing.
Yeah, because you start with speech.
Exactly. Exactly. We do not have one breathing system for speaking and one breathing system for singing. We do not have one vibrator for speaking and one for singing. One resonator for speaking, one resonator for singing. No, it's all the same system. Okay? Yeah. And this can really be earth-shattering once you figure out, oh, if I can learn to speak well, then I might be able to actually sing better. So what do we do when we sing? We sustain our speaking voice on the composer's pitches and rhythms. So that brings me to my next group of exercises. Sustaining the sound over multiple pitches. Okay, sustaining over multiple pitches and speeds. One constant vibration. Sustaining one pitch with multiple vowels. Okay? Sustaining one pitch with one vowel and multiple consonants. This is a fun one. Ba cha da fa ga. Ha ja ka la ma. Na pa kwa ra sa ta va wa ya za. Okay? Because we have consonants and vowels in music, so why not practice combinations? The real fun one comes when you take multiple vowels and multiple consonants. Ba che di fogu, ha je kilomu, na pa su. Okay? It's you can make all kinds of fun combinations and so forth, but it's all about sustaining. Okay? Then the next three are in different colors because these are the three that I use not only for voice building certain things, but also for extending the ranges. Okay? Sustaining I don't use to extend the range. Okay? It's just primarily these four here. Portamento, the Italian word to bring. So you bring the voice from one note up to the next note, up to the next note. Later on down the line, there's a question about what's something I wish choir directors would do, or maybe it's not do. And that is to teach students to put an H in between pitches if you're singing a melisma of many vowels, many notes on the same vowel, to endeavor to not have the students use an H.
Interesting.
Okay? Italians don't do that. Okay? So that's why I have the portamento, but always with vibrato. Then there's got to be some work on velocity. Yeah, there's got to be something with that. There could be arpeggios. Or, okay. Staccati are excellent, of course. And then finally, the crescendo diminuendo, the ability to do this on one note or perhaps over a phrase. These are all things that have to be built into one's technique. How do you select repertoire for a student? Well, I've already talked about this a little bit. I will find out what their singable, performable range is. Most of the time for a freshman, it's about an octave and a fifth. So I find a piece, hopefully that will stay within that bottom middle octave, okay, and begin working that way. If they have studied another instrument, that adds to their ability to perhaps do something a little more complex. But if there's a student coming to school for the first time and they sort of discovered this voice at the last part of their high school time, and they've really never studied another instrument, then the music can't be as challenging. Okay, there's more things they have to learn at the same time. How do I work on pitch? If possible, I endeavor to fix intonation without actually speaking about it. So if you're told that note is flat, what's the first thing you want to do to try to fix it? Tilt your head, yeah. Tilt your head, raise your eyebrows, and constrict the throat. So now you're not singing out of tune, but now you have these other crutches that you've used that we need to get rid of those. So we haven't solved anything. So oftentimes, if the mechanism can work in a healthy way, the pitch will solve itself over time. Okay. Sometimes it can help to put a finger back here. Just turn the ear this way, maybe to help the person hear differently. Okay. Sometimes making sure that the pitch has vibrato will bring it in tune. Sometimes it's the vowel that needs to be different. But sometimes you also then, if a person is more advanced, you can say to them, so that's out of tune. That's a little sharp. I think you're doing this to do that, so approach it this way. Teacher has to sort of understand the mind of the student a little bit to know how best to communicate with them. How do you get a student out of their comfort zone? What do you do to keep them, if they keep stopping and saying, oh, that sound is bad, how do you reassure and encourage them? I've had students like that. Okay, I'll say, how does that feel? I'll sing quite a marvelous sound. How does that feel? Well, I don't like the way it sounds. I didn't ask you that. How does it feel? Well, it feels okay, but they don't like the way it sounds. Well, in some ways, we are our own worst enemies, aren't we? We hear ourselves and we immediately make judgments about it based upon what we're hearing, and we shift and manipulate things. So I have to tell students, I don't care what it sounds like. We're working on the mechanics, and we have to be willing to accept that there may be some cracks, there may be some missteps. And if they still don't want to listen to me, I will go as far as to have them sing with their fingers in their ears. And I will take away their ability to hear themselves. And this is a very fascinating exercise. Because you will, if you do it yourself, you sing any of your favorite exercises with your fingers in your ears, and then do an exercise where you go up to a high note, hold the note, and then take your fingers out of your ears, you will be surprised by what comes out. Because you will discover, oh, that's really quite different than how I normally sing that pitch, that note. What does that say? That you're actually adjusting it per what you think it should sound like versus what it should behave like in here. It's really kind of a fun exercise. There are other ways to achieve the same thing. You can sing like this, or you can sing like this. And it just takes your ability to hear yourself the way you normally do.
So you're kind of shifting the feedback.
Yeah,
loop.
right. Yeah. Yes.
Awesome.
Now I'm going to hold off on talking about the comfort zone for just a moment, okay?
Great.
I'll come back to that. What do you do if your students clearly aren't practicing? What's the most rewarding part of teaching lessons? All right, the reason I put these two together is because I would say that the most rewarding part of teaching lessons is when I hear what happens to a student who is practicing. It is very obvious. We can tell. Teachers, we can tell when somebody's been practicing or when they haven't, because the change is very obvious. It's a little bit like growing up and only seeing your grandparents or your aunts and uncles every 2 years. And the next time they see you, what do they say? Oh, you've gotten so much bigger. Okay. Well, that sort of happens with lessons. Just being gone from the student, having the student not be around for a week. And when they come back, you can hear changes. And we also can remember where the mistakes were, where the things that needed to be adjusted, and when they're not adjusted. All right. So there's that. So when those changes take place, maybe not all of them, but when they take place, that is so gratifying to know that someone is endeavoring to actually try this, and they're actually seeing something happen. It's also a great pleasure just to simply see the light go on. Teachers have been around long enough to be able to hear someone sing and to know where that voice will be, where that voice could go in 2 or 3 years once it frees up. And I would say most of the time we are short-sighted in our own assessment. It can even go farther than that. But when a student begins to see what's inside, they experience the sound that they have inside, and that the smile that comes across their face, that is very, very thrilling. Yeah. But let's say that I do encounter a student who's not practicing. Then I have to do a little, we have to have a little sit down and talk. And it could be because they're a perfectionist. Speaking as one, what's one of the hardest things for a perfectionist to do? To just begin. To just begin to do something. Because we're afraid it's not going to be perfect. So we can't even begin. So we procrastinate. So maybe this person's a perfectionist, and we have to have a little talk about pursuing excellence versus perfection. I have a little lecture I give the students every year about that. I haven't actually done it this year yet. But then maybe that's not it. Maybe they've come to school and they realized this is not for me. But they can't bring themselves to tell their mother or father, or they can't bring themselves to tell me. And so they go into passive-aggressive mode. They just don't practice. And then we just have to have a meeting that says, tell me what you're really thinking. Okay, and are you going to get in the game, or is it time for you to think about another major? It's okay. It's all right, but let's not waste each other's time. Yeah. Now, a few years back, I read a fascinating book called Talent is Overrated. Talent is Overrated by a fellow named Jeffrey Colvin, Colvin. His first name is spelled Geoffrey. And it's not a music book. It's a business book. But it's about the idea that people are not born with a math gene. They're not born with a golf gene. Tiger Woods, one of the best golfers we've had in the last 30 years, whatever. He wasn't born with a golf gene. He was born into a family of a father who loved golf. Mozart, his theory is Mozart was not born with a music gene. He was born into a family where his father was a very famous music pedagogue and was teaching him music at the age of 3. Okay? And in this book, he talks about the nature of practicing and how practicing is not something that's enjoyable, but it is beneficial. You have to be really ready to spend hours and hours alone. He talks about learning zones, 3 learning zones. And most of us like to live in the comfort zone. Activities we can already do. So we just do those, and therefore we make no progress. We have to move into the learning zone. This is where progress is made, where skills and abilities just out of reach are practiced so that they eventually move into the comfort zone. It's my job as the teacher to give you the tools so you can take those things, those skills that are just out of reach, those ability to sing 2 octaves, the ability to sing melismas at 16th notes at 140 or 120 to the quarter, whatever the case may be, okay? To take those skills, bring them into the comfort zone. But there's a third zone called the panic zone, where we don't even know what questions to ask. We just know that when we think about doing that, we're panicked. And we have to take the things that are in the panic zone, bring them into the learning zone, bring the learning zone into the comfort zone. And of course, we make it difficult because every year we increase the difficulty of the pieces. Huh?
Yeah.
I found this to be very helpful to my own understanding. And when students see this, they say, oh, of course, I experience that every day. I realize that now. And they'll say, oh, that's not in the learning zone. That's definitely in the panic zone. Or no, that the reason I'm not making any progress is because I'm just doing the things that I like to do, not the things that are hard. How do I talk about vocal health? I endeavor to be just as frank as possible. If you, now as all of you are being trained to be music educators, you're going to use your voice a lot.
Right.
So you have to know about hydration. You have to drink lots of water. You have to avoid screaming at all costs. You have to find ways to not do that. You have to be very aware of the Lombard effect. The Lombard effect, named after the fellow who discovered it, says that if you're in an atmosphere where the sound of the sound around the atmosphere is raised, is elevated, we will talk louder so that we hear ourselves the way we normally do. So what kinds of situations does that happen in? Parties, airplanes, cars, right? We're not thinking about it, but the sound around us is so much louder that we ourselves talk louder just to be heard, because we want to hear ourselves the way we normally do. And if you're especially if you're in a party late into the night where everybody's emotions are all ramped up and so forth, and then you go home and you wake up the next day, and what does this feel like? swollen. Okay, you have to find a slightly more professional way to celebrate things if you have to use your voice. No screaming, hydration. You have to understand your own talking habits. Are you a person that talks to think, or are you more of a quiet person? Because this is your bread and butter right in here. Avoid vocal fry. Okay. Avoid vocal fry. Avoid a lot of glottal stops when you're speaking. Now you can learn a glottal stop when you're singing, and you can do a gentle one, okay? But constantly doing it in your when you're speaking can really tire a voice out and wear on a voice. How do I set professional boundaries? I'll go through this very quickly. I endeavor to speak about the student. I endeavor to not use the word my students as if I possess them. I am one person on the road. I am one person in a group of many people that are teaching them and training them. All right? I do not own them. I just don't endeavor to not use that word. Instead, I use the phrase students who are working with me, or students who are studying with me. It helps my mind. It helps me to maintain the right position with the students, I believe. I don't use nicknames. If their name is Alexandra and everybody calls them Alex, I call them Alexandra. I endeavor to remember who's paying my salary. You, your parents. You're paying my salary. So you are paying me to hold you to UNT standard. That's how I look at it. I have a small uncovered glass on my door so people can look in while I'm teaching. Right? I think that's a very wise thing to have. And I find that I can do it every once in a while. We have to talk about the body when we're singing. And I find that I can do everything I need to do with the singers, whether it be a woman or a man, with a pencil. Okay, I take a pencil. Maybe their head is doing something. I'll just put the pencil on their head. I might put a pencil on their shoulder. Okay? If I'm talking about the abdominal area, I demonstrate on myself. I do not touch that area, or I might grab a book. I'll grab a book and I'll have them hold the book to themselves like this, so they feel that expansion. Okay? There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about that kind of thing. I'm not here to be the student's friend. I'm here to be your greatest advocate, but also your toughest critic, I think. That's how I approach that. How much do you use the piano during a lesson? Well, I play along for the vocalizing, but I generally don't play all the notes. I generally just play the chords, so the student can develop independence. I break a lesson into usually two halves. The first half, maybe there'll be 5 minutes of catching up on any housekeeping items, paperwork, whatever the case may be. Then the next 20 minutes will be voice building, going through a portion or all of those exercises to continue to build the range, to continue to build the ability to do all these different things. And then the last half will be the pianist joins us. Of course, that's not happening right now. And we work on repertoire. Occasionally, depending if there's a recital coming up, I might shorten the first part and spend longer on repertoire. Or sometimes if we're working on a vocal thing, I might shorten the repertoire part and work more on voice. So what's your favorite exercise, somebody asked, or kinesthetic tool? My favorite exercise is just to speak. Va, ve, vi, vo, vu. Ba cha da fa ga. If I only had one exercise, that's all I would really need to do. Ba cha da fa ga. Okay, you can speak your way into being warmed up. Because what am I going to then do? Take my speaking voice and sustain it. But if I get to do an exercise, this is my favorite exercise. Okay, you get a nice change of notes. You get through almost all the vowels, all right, and get things moving around. And if I get to do a kinesthetic thing, I beat the drum. Oh, oh. It gets the core of the body engaged. You have to be really vigorous. You have to get these shoulders to move. Oh, like that. Most of you want to go like this. All right. I think these are the last two questions. How do you help singers balance choral and solo technical demands? I tell them two things, and then I'm going to tell a little story. I tell them, I am not teaching you to blend. I'm teaching you to stick out. So you're going to have to wear two hats for a while. You're going to have to wear a choral hat, and when you step out of the chorus room, chorus rehearsal, you take it off and you put on your soloist hat. That's what you wear the rest of the time. And then one day, you will be able to wear the soloist hat all the time, and your technique will be strong enough that you can make the adjustments you need as you're singing in choir. That's how I approach it. And eventually, your voice may be the voice that the choir director wants to build the section around, okay, rather than maybe the person that fills in around the leader of the section. I'll tell you a quick story. There was a student that I was teaching here at UNT, concentration student. And when he began working with me, there was no vibrato in the voice. And so I immediately began working so that every tone had vibrato. This was quite a challenge for him, but eventually he got it. And so then he sang in studio class. And because of that situation, the fear of that situation, he went back to his old way. So then after he sang through it, we went back and I said, okay, I'd like you to do it again, and you're going to sing it the new way. And he sang it with this beautiful tone. It had vibrato. Now, in the class, this was my studio class, was a doctoral conducting student. His related field was voice lessons. So he was studying with me. And as soon as this student finished singing the second time with vibrato, beautiful sound, much more generous tone, the doctoral student raised his hand. I called on him. His name was Brian. I said, Brian, what? And he said, that's the kind of singer I want in my choir. Okay? And that got that young man's attention. He never went back to the other way. Okay? That doctoral student is now in charge of the choral program at Baylor. Brian Schmidt is his name. What is one technique thing you wish all choir directors would teach their ensembles? And I have two. No H's on melismatic passages. I think it's much more difficult to train a bunch of singers to sing melismatic passages all together without those H's. Those H's help give you a sense of all being together. But in the long run, in terms of soloistic singing, it gets in the way. It's very, very challenging. It interrupts the legato line. And the other thing is, and I don't know that choir directors necessarily teach this, endeavor to not lift your eyebrows when you inhale to begin singing.
Oh, we work on that a lot in conducting to bring
Okay?
a choir in.
Yeah, right? So that conductors don't go, but rather, because these right here create tension. They do nothing to assist in a beautiful free sound. They just create tension.
Hmm.
And if you've been doing it long enough, they start creating all kinds of lines in the face. I know I'm right up against the clock, Rachel, but
Yeah.
I have one more quick thing to share with you.
Go for it.
All right. Final thoughts. Teaching is rewarding. When a student grasps the truth and realizes their potential, then playing a role in that process is entirely fulfilling. But teaching is also a solemn responsibility. Parents and students spend large amounts of money. They entrust the institution to equip them for success. And the professor is indirectly the employee of the parents and the students to teach, encourage, exhort, and hold the student to that standard. Teaching is also a powerful position, and teachers must guard against abusing that power, either verbal or physical abuse, inappropriate behavior, or even manipulating the student for their own personal gain, and shutting down honest inquiry, or having students parrot what they do. It's a very powerful position, and those things can be very challenging. And finally, teaching is a team effort. You're experiencing this, I think, with the group. Other faculty members are another valuable resource. One teacher cannot cover all the bases. Collegiality reinforces the point that the institution and the instructors are there for you to reach your goals, to be a success, and to continue to pass that on to the next people, the next group, yeah, to the next generation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to talk about this.
Yeah, I definitely learned a lot, and I'm really excited to share it with everyone else.
Good. All right.
Dr. Morscheck.
You're welcome. Thank you very much, Rachel. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
Okay.
Thanks.